Okay, welcome to this next video lecture. We are continuing to speak about promotion and integrated marketing communications. And two areas that we'll talk about today are direct marketing and social media. Direct marketing is probably the oldest form of promotion, yet it's also the newest in that it has been energized by technology, the internet and computers and databases. And this is, of course, has made direct marketing a very powerful form of promotion. Direct marketing is the interactive system of marketing used to generate direct and measurable responses. So for instance, we send out an offer directly to consumers and they respond, and we can measure how quickly they respond, how many respond, in what ways they respond. So it's actually a very effective way of interacting with consumers. For buyers, direct marketing is convenient, it's easy, and it's private. Now, as we are currently in a pandemic, this is July, I'm recording this during July of 2020, we're seeing this much more. Offers coming out and more people responding because they can't go to the store very easily, to brick and mortar retailers. But even before the pandemic, direct marketing was very effective, and it is convenient, and more people are buying things online. And as people buy more things online, they're more responsive to direct offers. And there are very all sorts of forms of direct marketing. Some older ones, such as direct mail. In fact, originally that was the term that was used, direct mail, as opposed to direct marketing. And for the most part, direct mail, in particular, focused on catalogs. You know, you might receive the LL Bean catalog or some other catalog in the mail, and look through it, and then the consumer would, respond. They would see something they liked, and they would, put a check in an envelope with the order form and send it back. And this was, of course, pre-internet. But catalogs have been very effective, and they still are. Even though now, if somebody receives a catalog, they would probably respond online, but it is still the catalog which is triggering the purchase. And so catalogs, even though they are a very old form of direct marketing, they should not be discounted. Still can be a powerful component in your promotional plans. And of course, people send postcards and other types of mailers as well. Another branch of direct marketing is, of course, telemarketing. And we receive calls all the time for solicitations. And that has, of course, has been very effective, for many years. We also have direct response ads, and these are ads you might see in a magazine, or where there are a specific offer made, and that you could respond to it and get, maybe some money off, or an extra gift, or something like that, some sort of sales promotion. And that, of course, works very well. And most of them, of course, are print, but we also have infomercials. And we'll talk a little bit more about infomercials later on. And of course, there are these direct marketing TV networks, QVC and the Home Shopping Network, which are sort of, 24-hour infomercials. And they have been very effective for selling certain types of products, certainly. We also have email, and of course, I am sure that you have all received email solicitations. I receive them every day. As a consumer, it becomes a little bit problematic, and part of the problem is that, particularly with email, it's not done in a targeted fashion. It's done in an indiscriminate. If we can find an email address, let's just email them, because the cost is so low. Unfortunately, I think that because it's so indiscriminate, it has raised people's, shields up. They will, we have spam folders and filters and other things like that. something had happened a couple of years ago to me. I was all of a sudden receiving one point over 200 spam emails a day, and it was for a wide range of products, things that I would never use in most cases. And somebody had gotten my email, and I think they were launching a new domain, and they decided the way to make the domain popular was to spam everyone. I don't know what the thinking was behind it, and I actually had to arrange a special for a special filter from the company that I have my email set up with. I don't have a Google, or I mean a Gmail or a Hotmail account or anything like that. I actually have my own a company that handles my my email server, and it was really annoying. And first thing I do is when I open up my emails, I just delete all the spam I can. And this is because it was untargeted. It was sort of a mass marketing approach, and you want to be careful about that. While it was cheap and easy for some companies, but it's actually undermined the effectiveness of email marketing. In many cases, even though it's an older version, sometimes a print piece that comes in the mail, into your physical mailbox, can many times be more effective, even though it costs a little bit more, because people would actually have to take go through the motions of throwing it out. Whereas an email, you just hit the delete button, and I've gone through my email, and I'm sure you've done the same. Just delete, 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 until something I see I might be interested in, usually from somebody I know. There's a lot of online direct marketing. There are tons of commerce websites and commerce, e-tailing, sites like Amazon and eBay and so forth. Certainly putting up banner ads, paying, and this is a type of advertising where you put up a banner ad, pay to put a banner ad on somebody else's website, and that there'll be a link to your website or a link to your your selling site. And that was sort of the first forms of advertising in the use when the internet came to be, and people would pay for that, and they still do. Of course, now we have social networking, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, towards the end of this lecture. But that certainly has created lots of opportunities. And social networking, its usefulness falls into two categories. One is the part you're familiar with, people interacting with one another, making recommendations and so forth. And the other is a venue for having advertising, paid advertising to pop up on people's timeline or as they scroll through their social media. And it can be very effective. We also have kiosk marketing, which is a slightly different category of thing. The simplest would be a vending machine. You set up a vending machine in a certain place, and it's right there, and other people will set up maybe kiosks that have people, but the idea is you can move them around and actually sell a lot of products. Netflix actually started with machines that were like vending machines. You could go and you could actually rent a DVD, and then you'd have to return it, sort of like Blockbuster, if any of you remember that company. Direct marketing has a number of wonderful advantages. First is it's very measurable. I have known executives who are not actually particularly comfortable with advertising because it's somewhat intuitive. It's soft and fuzzy to them. And I specifically remember this one executive. He was a divisional president, and he would actually, when we started talking about advertising and positioning and things that were non-numerical, you could see he felt uncomfortable, unsure of himself in that type of situation. He liked numbers. He was a numbers guy, and there are measurements in advertising, but mostly what you're talking about is positioning and perceptual issues, of message. However, many of these executives who gravitate to things like accounting and other types of analysis would like this. They would like direct marketing. It's very measurable. You send out so many offers, you receive so many responses, and you can work it that way. And it does allow for experimentation. I can do what is called a split run. I can make, let's say I send one offer out to 10,000 people and a different offer out to a different 10,000 people, and I see which responds better. If I'm making one type of offer in one, and I can make a different type of offer for the other, and I see which side is the winner, and then that tells me how I should proceed going forward. And again, you only want to, in any experiment, you only alter one variable at a time. And you can test all sorts of things, the media, copy, what text you're using, the scripts, visuals, or the actual incentives, the offers. In one of the early experiments done in direct marketing, at the time it was probably called direct mail, there was Columbia House Records. It was a clearinghouse for selling LP vinyl albums, and the deal was for $1 you get 6 albums, which was a great deal, but the catch was you also had to buy within the next year 2 more albums. Still seems like a good deal. And what they would do is they would send you a postcard, and if you send it back to them saying, no, I don't want the album for this month, that was fine. But if you didn't send the postcard, they would send you the record. And the idea is, if you missed it, you get the record. And because people are not perfect about responding to things, they would sell a lot of records that way. But you get a choice of 6 records at the initial offer. It was a choice of 6 out of 12. Now, most of us have certain genres of music that we all prefer. And the genres, country western, show tunes, rock, jazz. This is before rap and some other forms of music. There's also be opera. And usually you only have a choice of 2 albums in a particular genre of music, and so you ended up getting the 2 in the genre you liked, but then you have to pick 4 others that maybe you wouldn't like so much. And one person said, you'll improve your response rate if you give people a choice from a wider range of albums. And there was a pushback on that because they're hoping maybe to sell those records as opposed to giving them away. It was, okay, let's do an experiment. Let's do a split run. And amazingly, not really amazingly, as you would expect, the response rate was much better when they offered a wider range. Instead of a choice of 6 out of 12, it was 6 out of 36. Got a much better response rate. And they ended up selling a lot more records because of it. And it also allows for segmentation and targeting. You don't have to send the same offer to everyone. You say, and you again, we've talked previously about marketing segmentation and positioning. So you pick that market segment and you give them a certain type of offer that will appeal to them and see how they respond to it. And you can develop a relationship through a dialogue. Now, that might sound a little strange, but if you think about it, if I make, and let's use the music example. Let's say you like jazz, and the company sends you an offer for jazz, you're going to respond to that. If they send you an offer for opera, you're probably not going to respond to that. So they know based on what you respond to, what you like. You like jazz. Okay, we're going to send you more jazz offerings. We're not going to send you any more opera offerings. Somebody else over there, they like opera, and they're going to respond to the opera offerings. So you're not really developing a relationship, but you can develop a profile of, based on what they respond to, what products they look for. And that is sort of a win-win for both the marketer and the consumer. The consumer, if this is done right, the consumer isn't going to receive a lot of offers that they're not interested in. If you think about what comes into your mailbox, um, a lot of it's indiscriminate. It's on stuff that you're not interested in, and what do we call it? We call it junk mail, because it's stuff we don't want. It's junk. If direct marketing were done perfectly, that word wouldn't exist, or that phrase wouldn't exist, because everyone you receive, oh, that's something of interest to me. Unfortunately, it is cheaper, particularly if you don't have a lot of data on your consumer base or your target market, to send them things that they wouldn't necessarily be interested in. But if you perfect it, you could actually make your operation, your marketing operation and your direct marketing much more efficient. Go after the people who respond and not so much after the people who don't respond. And I have seen companies send me stuff for many, many years, and I never responded. I remember actually um, at my parents' house, I still occasionally receive mailings from one particular company. I won't mention the name of the company, but uh, I've never responded to any of their mailings. And now 30 years later, or over 30 years later, they're still sending mailings to my parents' house. They don't know that I've moved out, decades ago. Uh, and that, of course, it's a waste of time. So if you're, and a lot of companies will do what's called a cleansing of their database to clear out the people who are not responding, because that's just a waste of time. They don't do that so much with emails, because emails are have almost not zero cost, but almost zero cost. The cost of sending an email to one individual is de minimis. It's almost nothing. But if you could cut down your list by several thousand, that would be a lot easier. And also, much of this direct marketing is not seen directly by the competitor, and that's not the most important thing by any means. But I do remember one particular marketing director that I worked for. We would work out our budget. We're going to do so much on print and different types of print, and various other marketing activities, maybe some on TV, a little on radio. And this one marketing director always had me keep a couple thousand aside, and usually for a direct mail postcard. Now, in most of our advertising, we never mentioned our competitors, and I'm not a big fan of invoking your competitor's name. Why give them the advertising, even if you're putting them down? But he always liked to send out a postcard that would go directly to the consumers. It wouldn't be in magazines or newspapers or on TV or anywhere else, or online. He would just send this postcard. We had a database of customers, and it was usually taking a swipe at our competitor. He kind of had I would say a nasty edge, but he had an edge to him, and he always wanted to kind of give them a little barb. But he said, I do it because they're not going to see it right away. It might be months before they come across one of these postcards that we're sending out. Now, of course, eventually people do find out, because part of your competitive intelligence is trying to figure out what they're sending out. And many marketing managers will try to get on their competitors' mailing lists, whether it's email or snail mail or whatever. For instance, I worked for one company where we were selling products into the cattle industry, and one of my associates got on our competitor's list. He convinced them that he had 50,000 head of cattle in Homedale, New Jersey. There are not 50,000 head of cattle in the entire state of New Jersey, but he convinced them. But eventually they figured out that he wasn't a real cattle rancher. I mean, he did have a cattle ranching background, and his father had 50,000 head of cattle, but that was in Nebraska. So we would try to get on their list. They would try to get on ours, and we would always try to clean everyone out, periodically. That's those are some advantages. There are some challenges. Privacy concerns are particularly paramount these days. We are seeing more and more hacking of databases. And if we are holding, and we have an ethical responsibility here, if we are holding people's personal information, we have a responsibility to keep it secure. And now, in many cases, it's just simple things like name, address, and telephone number. But often we hold much more sensitive information, such as credit card numbers, social security numbers, other data that is personal. And recently, one of the companies I deal with, they're redoing their website, and they're creating a new platform. And to get on this new platform, I clicked on it. They wanted me to provide all sorts of personal information, and I could not imagine why they would need this information. And I'm going to have to deal with that. But apparently you can't get onto the new platform without providing this information, and I may just tell them to go to hell. It's actually an investment company. I don't have a lot of money with them. It has to do with one of my pensions. And you know, and there's some people who just say, well, we'll just collect as much information as possible. But they also need to keep it secure. And considering lately there has been not a lot of database security. A couple of years ago, there was a big breach at, I think it's Target, and they had, they had gotten into the Target databases. And then I said, oh my God, I did purchase something at Target. I'm not a big Target customer, but I have occasionally, and I have used my credit card. So do they have my credit card now? And it may be worth it periodically to change your credit card numbers. I had, years ago, there was a breach in California, and my mother-in-law was actually advised. This was before all the plethora of hacking that's been going on in the last couple of years. It was a fairly rare occurrence, and they notified my mother-in-law, and because there was a law in California saying you have to notify people in a database if the database has been hacked. So obviously we're dealing with this. The take-home message is don't collect any more information than you need, and and if you have that information, keep it very secure. For instance, I've created a database, and I only ask for very little information. I ask for their name, their email address, and their zip code. And that's all I want. The emails to send the messages, the zip code to know what location they're in. From the zip code, I can figure out their county and their town and their state. So I get the rough. I don't want their street address because I'm not going to do direct mailing to them. Me and my client, we both agree that this is not something we want to do. And that's all we collect. We don't, and we could have asked for more, but we chose not to. And we back it up, and we try to keep it as secure as possible, even though this information is not terribly, beyond the email, it's not terribly personal. Certainly your zip code is not that personal to you. But there are a lot of privacy concerns. Even the military is not immune in ways that you might not expect. This was an incident a few years ago where someone at the Pentagon, their laptop was stolen, and it was a military laptop. And there were no military secrets on the laptop. However, there was the personnel information of every member of the U.S. military. All the branches, and it had things like obviously name, address, telephone numbers, social security numbers, other information, which is particularly disconcerting because these people who are maybe deployed overseas, particularly into war zones, would be very vulnerable to identity theft and other forms of scams and fraud. So we all need to do our best to reduce this, and that includes keeping the information that we have secure. In fact, actually, just before this recording this lecture, there was something on the news about, I think the FBI and other government agencies meeting with various companies because there's been active hacking into many companies, particularly pharmaceutical companies. We are currently dealing with the coronavirus, and China and Russia are trying to hack into our computers to steal cures and information about cures and other data. But they've been after a lot of other things. China in particular is they're not so much trying to steal they try to steal the military secrets, but also they're very into stealing industrial secrets and business secrets. So understand there are a lot of bad guys out there. Another thing is the do not call registry. If you're doing any telemarketing, I remember a number of years ago, the telemarketing was getting out of hand. I remember I sit down to dinner and I would get 4 or 5, my dinner would be interrupted by 4 or 5 telemarketing calls. And fortunately or unfortunately, members of Congress were also receiving the same treatment, because these were people who just dumping everyone's random telephone numbers into an auto dialer and just calling. And it didn't matter who calling, and it got annoying enough that Congress passed the Do Not Call registry law. Essentially, anyone who does telemarketing has to check with the Do Not Call registry to see if they're allowed to call this telephone number. And I remember registering my home telephone number, and within about a month, it took about 30 days to take effect, the calls dropped significantly. And that was a great thing. Now, more recently, we've seen people dialing in from outside the country and outside jurisdiction, so it's gone up a little bit. Plus, there has been robocalling. Now, robocalling is very effective because you're not using a human being. I, on a personal level, despise robocalling. I despise receiving it. Because it wastes my time. Sometimes I pick up the phone and it's just clicks and stuff. It's just automatic systems. I expect at some point we will need to deal with this as well. But people, it's very inexpensive once you get the system set up to just call as many, and it's a return on investment sort of thing. So one thing you want to do is also never add your cell phone number into the Do Not Call registry, because that actually gives people access to your cell phone. So I do get occasionally calls on my cell phone, but it's not that many. Anyway, there are certain exceptions to the Do Not Call registry. One, of course, are charities, because charities, since they don't generate revenue by selling a product or service, for the most part, they depend upon solicitations. They've been given an exemption for that. Of course, politicians gave themselves an exemption, and so you will, as we get closer to election day, you will receive more calls on the phone, usually during dinner or the dinner hours, and that's unfortunate. But politicians always give themselves special treatment. Surveys, and Congress said, well, seeking new information, developing new information is a good thing for society, and surveys are a tool for doing that. And so surveys are exempted as well. However, if the last question is, may I send you a brochure, then it's no longer considered a survey call, it's considered a solicitation. Admittedly, sometimes surveys are very biased, and they're not really designed to get more information, particularly political ones. Which would you prefer, honest candidate Smith or dishonest candidate Jones? Well, clearly, the idea is to position one candidate in a positive way and another in a negative way. But it is still technically a survey, and it still could be done in a commercial sense as well. And also, here's an interesting one: those who you've had a previous business relationship with. are exempted from this as well. So people you've done business with before make follow-up calls. However, there has been a fair amount of fraud with this too. Every 6 months or so, I would get a call from somebody selling replacement windows, and the person would say, "Well, we received an inquiry about somebody asked for an estimate. Your wife." They usually, if I answered, they say, "My wife asked for an estimate on replacement windows," and I said, "Well, I asked my wife, and she said no," and they still wanted to push it. And they, by saying that somebody had requested an estimate, they're trying to pretend it's actually a fraud. They're pretending they have a previous business relationship with you. It doesn't mean you actually had to buy product or services from them. They're just that you had initiated contact previously. Finally, one time this guy called, and I was getting to know him. I said, he said, "Oh yes, your wife said that." I said, "Well, really? My wife has been dead for 5 years, so how's that possible?" That really got him upset, which I was glad of. I'm all for marketing. I am very much against dishonest marketing and just fraud and lying in general. We can market without being fraudulent, and that's unfortunately some people kind of put those two together, but that's unfortunate. All right, I'm going to talk about something I rarely get to talk about, and that's talking about a little bit about history. And it's not just for the sake of history, but there are some direct marketing milestones that I'd like to share with you. I might ask you, when do you think the first example of direct marketing was? And when I usually ask students, this in a live situation, they will tell me things like, "Oh, well, the 1930s," or something like that. Actually, we can go back to 1667 for the first example, and it was a gardener named William Lucas who actually put out a catalog of his bulbs and bushes, and like rose bushes and things, bulbs and seeds and things like that. And he actually, would send it out to the local area. And so a list of, I've actually been trying to find a copy of this, but I can't really, haven't been able to find one, but I'm told that this was the first example. This is the first example that we at least can document. But it tells you that direct marketing goes back a long way, but it certainly has evolved. Coming to the United States, in 1744, Benjamin Franklin publishes a catalog of books and essentially introduces mail order. Benjamin Franklin was actually, I believe he was the first postmaster general in the United States, which would have been the colonies at that time. Most people don't realize that Benjamin Franklin's profession was not scientist, it was not politician. He was actually a Philadelphia printer. He would print broadsheets, he would print books, and that was his profession, and that's how he made his money. And then that gave him money to do his, kite and key experiment and other things, as well as participate in the political arena. But he was a printer, and he took advantage of, I don't know if he took advantage of his position, but he initiated mail order. He sent out catalogs through this system and said that doing business with him through the mail would provide the same integrity that if you were dealing with him in person. And he kept that ethic. And in fact, a few years ago, Benjamin Franklin was finally entered into the Direct Marketing Hall of Fame. Hard to believe that there actually is a Direct Marketing Hall of Fame for for marketing, but it's there. Jumping ahead to 1862, there is the westward expansion, and it triggers an opportunity for catalog sellers. In around 1862, kind of at the end, generally at the end of the Civil War, the country started moving west. Now, factories didn't move west. Mostly it was people, farmers and livestock people, cowboys, ranchers, maybe some gold miners, but industrialists didn't move west. That's not generally how that sort of migration works. But this was aided by the Transcontinental Railroad, which came actually, I think, after 1862. But it kind of started with a conductor named Sears, the same guy, Sears of Sears Roebuck. He was a conductor, and he had found an unclaimed box of pocket watches. Now, pocket watches were very valuable to train conductors because every station had its own time. So you could look at the clock in the station, you wouldn't know if that was really true or not. So the watches were pocket watches were very valuable. And so he had made up a flyer and sent this flyer up and down the railroad to all his fellow conductors saying, would you like to buy a pocket watch? And he realized there was a lot of value in this. So Sears and Mr. Roebuck set up a catalog industry in Chicago. And the Sears catalog was a piece of, it was an American icon. If you lived in a town out west, and the new Sears catalog came into town, and usually it was kept at the general store, some agent would hold it. People would come into town to see what was in the new Sears catalog. Sears catalog sold things like fabrics, seeds, farm equipment, guns, dresses, men's clothing, a wide range of things. And you could put your money in an envelope with the little form and send it to Chicago, and then the shipment would come back to you. I think they ended the Sears catalog in the 1970s when Sears had, by that point, Sears had also developed a sort of brick and mortar network of stores. Ironically, we're now seeing the demise of that. Sears is not dead, but it's on its decline, as a lot of brick and mortar retail is. But it made a huge difference, this catalog selling. They were like a powerhouse in this area. And I actually did a little work for them back in the 1980s in Chicago. Not that I have an insight into them, but it was a powerhouse. And I kind of feel a little sad that they're kind of on their, heading over the horizon into such sharp decline. But that's the way it goes. Then 1928, third-class mail is introduced. If you think about first-class mail, if you put something in an envelope and mail it, let's say from the East Coast to the West Coast, it will probably get there in about 2 days. If it's local, it might get there in 1 day. Actually, in one case, I mailed something really early in the morning to to another person in the same town as I was, and it actually arrived the same day. So I know there's a lot of play about snail mail, and the mail's really slow, but in the 21st century, actually mail works pretty fast. Not as fast as email, but anyway, the advantage of third-class mail was the economies of scale. What the post office said was, okay, you want to send a lot of stuff? We'll give you a quantity discount. The only price is that it won't be delivered in 2 days. It'll be probably delivered in 5. And for a catalog, no big deal, because catalogs usually, particularly in those days, had a long life. In the heyday of catalog sales, a catalog might still be producing sales 18 months after it's originally sent out, because they track numbers, and that's a very important part of direct marketing is tracking. And so I remember, if you fill out try to make a catalog sale, they want the number of the product, but also what catalog it came from, and they can track the success of a catalog. And like, if one catalog is particularly productive, they'll look at that catalog. What did they do on that one they didn't do on others? Again, direct marketing is about measurability. So, third-class mail, it's cheaper. You get the economies of scale, and you don't really lose anything with, by being delayed 3 days. So, In 1950, the credit card is introduced. Now, most people think Federal American Express was the first credit card, but actually it was Diners Club, and it was primarily targeted towards business travelers who were, like salespeople or other type travelers. And instead of carrying a lot of cash, which could be stolen, um, you could use a credit card, and it primarily was used at restaurants and hotels where traveling people would need that. Then American Express is introduced 8 years later, and of course now we have Visa and MasterCard and others. Um, but this was a major step forward in direct marketing because uh, while it was just originally designed for travelers, other people, catalog marketers, could say, well, okay, instead of putting a check or cash in an envelope, write the credit card number. Um, and of course, new credit cards are now also used online um, and in stores in general. I remember working in a retail store and having to take credit cards, and now it's all done digitally. But there was this big machine and have to push the print press across it. Actually, there was a machine that you had to use it was a mechanical thing to process credit cards, and I'd have to call up and get an approval. Now that's all done digitally. Um, so things are a lot easier now. But credit cards, or imagine a world without credit cards, where you had to carry cash, or people had to accept checks. Um, so, and now actually people can accept credit cards with I think Square actually through their cell phone. So it's that technology, that concept has moved through the various technological stages. Um, in 1967, AT&T introduces toll-free 800 numbers. Now, this might be difficult to think because now we all have cell phones, and I can call somebody in California for the same charge or lack of charge that I would call somebody across the room. I mean, I'm sure you've all called somebody who's like, downstairs or upstairs or across the room to, communicate with them. But it doesn't cost you any more than if you called somebody who was 1,000 miles away. However, on landlines, there's much higher costs, particularly back in the 1960s. And the reason this was so helpful is let's say we're interested in a product. Again, there's no internet at that time. And you want to ask somebody some questions about the product. Well, to call somebody in another state or another halfway across the country would be very expensive. I remember when I was in high school and I was considering where I wanted to go to college, I actually was thinking I might want to go to the University of Chicago, but not knowing much about it. I don't even know if I had a catalog, but I decided to call up somebody at the University of Chicago and ask some questions, and I did, and we had a very nice, probably a half-hour conversation, and that was that, and I hung up, and thank you very much. Okay. But a couple weeks later, all of a sudden, I hear my mother scream, "Who the hell called Chicago?" It cost about $30 for that one phone call. And $30 was a lot more back then. That was in the 1970s than it would be now. So it was a huge advantage because now customers could call you, and the cost, yes, there's still the cost of the call, but that could be rolled into the price. That's a cost of doing business. It could be part of the price structure of the product and fit well into the accounting of the company. And of course, it'd be a tax deductible expense as well. Even today, toll-free numbers are still of great value. Maybe there may be a point where we get rid of them because everyone's using cell phones, but that was a major step forward, and it should be recognized. In the 1990s, the internet arrives and becomes commercially viable for financial transactions. First, taking credit card numbers, and then payment intermediaries such as PayPal, and there's another one called Money Bookers, and there's a few other ones, but PayPal is, of course, the big one, which now allows us we don't have to send anything in. We can just type in our information, and our product is sent. And I'm sure you have all engaged in this. You've maybe not used PayPal, but you've certainly put your credit card number or debit card number into a e-commerce site, and a few days later you receive the product that you order. So these, of course, are significant milestones. My question is, what's next? Actually, it should be 2020, but or 2021 or 2022. What will be next? Certainly, the one area that is expanding right now is mobile, being able to make purchases over the phone. Of course, a lot of companies are trying to target that phone, and there's certain apps that get downloaded and tied in with GPS as you're walking down the street. Maybe it's lunchtime, and all of a sudden you receive something on your app. The restaurant just ahead or around the corner is having a special, and if with maybe an electronic coupon or something like that. And then a lot of mobile marketing is happening now. Being someone who thinks a little bit about science fiction, I think the next thing at some point might be a subdermal jack they put in your head, so you think about a product and then you can purchase it. I'm being a little bit silly here, but what is next? You want to think about that. Are there ways to reach consumers and customers in a way that you can't now? So anyway, moving on. Infomercials, which I think many of you are familiar with. A lot of Billy Mays and other people have done a lot of infomercials. Generally, they're between 2 and 60 minutes. They're usually, however, 30 minutes. And they purchase low-cost TV time, and it's usually at overnight, early morning. There was one point in my life where I was seeing a lot of infomercials. I'd be watching TV the night before, and then in the morning I would just turn the TV on while I prepared my breakfast, and I would listen or see whatever infomercial is on. I would never catch it at the beginning, and that's the thing. Nobody really usually looks for an infomercial. It's just something that occurs from a consumer point of view. So it may be 30 minutes, but the pitch has to be repeated, and they usually do that within 5-minute increments or even less. The faster you can do it, and not repeating the same thing over and over again, but getting the key sales points across very quickly, and because they never know when somebody's going to start watching or when they're going to stop watching. And of course, the toll-free number is up there all the time. There are strong uses of demonstrations. And there, of course, are incentives for you to call now. It's like, oh, well, we've got this extra gift that we'll throw in for the next 5 callers, or if you dial in the next 5 minutes, which puts a time pressure on it for you to make that call. Now, to be quite honest, if you called 10 minutes or 15 minutes from now, you'll probably get the same deal. But they're just trying to put a time pressure on. Less time to think about whether you really need it. Trying to essentially turn it into an impulse purchase. So, and again, there are repeated calls to action. And of course, they have a toll-free number because they don't want you to have to pay for calling them and buying their product. And there are all sorts of direct marketing measurements. 3, I think, important ones. The first one is the response rate, and this is just how do people respond? How many people respond? If you send 10,000 offers out, whether it's email or snail mail or however many, how many people actually respond? How many people respond to the infomercial? Let's see, X number of people are viewing and Y number of people are responding. And so you want to know the response rate. Again, we're constantly measuring. To be effective and to get the maximum amount of sales out of the smallest amount of expense. Another measurement is cost per inquiry, and that is, if I'm paying $100 for an ad, that's a ridiculously low amount, but let's say $100, and 1,000 people respond, that's 10 cents per inquiry. That's actually fairly low, but you get the idea. If you're spending $500 and you're reaching 5,000 people, you get the idea. You just do a simple division. It's a simple division problem. And you also have the cost per order. Not every inquiry generates an order. And I remember I was fairly good friends with the director of admissions at another school I taught at. And he would share things. And I actually was a consultant. In addition to teaching at the college, I also was a marketing consultant for the admissions department, kind of as a separate thing. And we would talk about, he'd talk about, for instance, he could run an ad, a direct response ad, and he would get so many inquiries. And it might be $1 per inquiry. Okay. And that's fine. That's a perfectly acceptable number. But then he had different levels. He said, well, okay, people inquire, but that doesn't mean they follow up. So then he said that he had different levels in between cost per inquiry and cost per order. And how many people of those actually showed up to the campus for an interview or a tour? And that was that was like maybe $10 per interview or a tour. Then how many, then there was how many people actually sat down to apply. And that was a different figure. That might have been maybe $50. And then how many people actually signed up, got accepted, and he was a Scottish guy who said, my final measurement is bums in seats. People actually sitting in the seat in the classroom that first week. And that number was like $1,000. So the initial cost per inquiry was like $1, but the cost per order was like $1,000. But considering how much tuition was and that somebody would be there for, so it was a 2-year school, 4 semesters, that made a lot of sense. $1,000 was a reasonable number. Now, it's not. What's important is not so much what those actual figures are, but what's the relationship between them and how do they change over time. If those two numbers start to go apart, you have to ask yourself why. Is it because maybe the salespeople aren't doing their job right, closing the deal, or maybe it's the initial offer was too fantastic. It was not as representative of what they were going to get. So you have to be very careful about that. And you investigate it. If you look at these numbers and when you see a change, you have to investigate. It doesn't necessarily mean a specific thing is happening, but just as kind of a warning. Okay. All right. Direct marketing, of course, is a very important area, and we don't want to ever ignore that. And it has a lot of potential for helping you. Another area which I think I've mentioned previously is social media. It's a new area. Is it a separate branch? Is it part of direct marketing? I'm not going to answer that question because everyone will have a different answer. But obviously, you are all familiar with social media here in the 21st century. Here are a few of the various platforms. Facebook is the #1 platform, at least at this time. Twitter is a #2. One I don't have on the screen here. Oh, no, yeah, do is Instagram. YouTube is very important because you can actually put better media on YouTube in terms of video. LinkedIn is actually, I would encourage everyone who's looking for a job, who's trying to build their career, to be on LinkedIn. It is kind of your resume online, and you can connect with people. HR departments, human resource departments actually look through LinkedIn for people when they need people. So why not be on LinkedIn? I actually was very active on LinkedIn. As I've gotten a little older and as I'm teaching and I'm consulting more, I'm a little less interested in LinkedIn. And that just has to do with the change in my business. But Facebook and Twitter are very helpful to me. I'm actually thinking of expanding. I do have an Instagram account, but I don't use it very much, and I should probably change that. it's very difficult for one person to manage a whole range of platforms, unless that's your full-time job. As a consultant, I don't have the time to do a lot of management, but if you're in a larger company, you will have people who will focus on these. Uh, and again, there's sort of two general approaches, and you'll probably use both. One is to just organically interact with people, customers and influencers, and the other is to post advertising on these platforms. And they will try to target, when you try to put advertising on, let's say, Facebook, you tell them what kind of person you're looking for, what age range, what other, uh, you know, demographics that you're looking for, geographics, that sort of thing. And I'm sure some of you are on other platforms. Um, some you want to be careful. I would recommend that you stay away from TikTok. Essentially, that is an extension of the Chinese government's intelligence service, and they are notorious for using their intellectual property to steal other people's intellectual property. So I know you may like TikTok, but I stay away from it. Find something at other platforms to use. Social media kind of is it's kind of the internet superpowered. Traditionally, we have had advertisers send messages one way to customers. Now, of course, customers can respond, and they do respond. And if you get into working in social media in any big way, one thing you want to do is listen, and that's very important. What are your customers saying? I remember I was very upset with my bank. Something had done something. Actually, I think I remember I wanted an ATM card as opposed to a debit card. I just wanted an ATM card for security reasons. I'm not a big believer in debit cards. And that's a personal opinion, that's whatever you prefer. And they kept on screwing up the ATM card thing, I think 5 times. So I got really angry and I started venting on social media. And I was amazed. Instantly, somebody from that bank was responding to me. How can we help you? How can we make your experience better? That sort of thing. Because they don't want me, they wanted to engage with me because they didn't want me to continue with my rant. And that's what social media, that's one of the problems with social media, is that it's very emotional. People will put on things unfiltered. People will say things online that they would never say face to face because there's nobody there. You're just putting it out there. You're typing in somewhere to nobody is specific. And that's sort of, it doesn't actually show human beings at their best. Somebody once said a person is at their best on their resume, and I would say they're at their worst on social media. Then we also have influencers. Now, influencers are people who people look up to, or and in our own lives, we all have influencers, people who we go to for advice. But online, there's also these people. Now, there are people who actually have turned it into a profession, which part of that scares me a little. But I know, for instance, the Kardashians, and I'm not a big fan of the Kardashians, but they are influencers. And if you see one of the Kardashians wearing a certain garment, certain people will be drawn to buy that garment because they also communicate with customers. So you need to communicate with the influencers. Now, sometimes, and I think I may have mentioned previously when I was talking about choosing target markets, and there were influencers, I talked about how equine veterinarians were the chief influencers over whether a certain drug was purchased for a horse. So there are more traditional influencers, people we tend to go to and trust, but online influencers are also quite significant. They have to have a lot of followers. I mean, not like, so I've heard somebody say, well, I'm going to be an influencer. I've got 300 Twitter followers. 300 is nothing. You need thousands, many thousands, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of followers. And it is, an image, a personal brand building that these people do. And some people have become influencers because of other things they have done in life. In some cases, these influencers have become influencers because they just have a very strong internet presence. And this goes to reputation and credibility and that sort of thing. And we, as advertisers, we need to keep these influencers in mind. We need to communicate to our customers, but also to the influencers in that industry or that that space. And we talked about networking. This is actually came out of an algorithm. I think it used to be on LinkedIn. It doesn't. The algorithm or the setup doesn't exist anymore. But this is actually a rough representation of my social network on LinkedIn, and they've color coded these different groups, and these are different communities. The blue was an old employer, so these are all people who I worked with at a previous employer. Actually, I believe it was Merck, the pharmaceutical company, and one of these others are other places I worked, and other social groups that I interact in, for the most part, in real life, but we also interact online. And we want to kind of look at these and understand the different areas that we're focused on, the different target markets. Now, for this is just my interacting with people casually, but this could also be how you interact with consumers and influencers and different market segments. And they do, as you see, they often interact with one another. And you can see, in the bottom, there's a sort of gray area and the blue areas, and they're kind of, connecting. It's not all discrete. And so but you have to think about how does this one targeted group react to things, what kind of message they'll react to, and then the other group. But at the same time, they may see what you target towards other people. So compared to traditional media, you're able to reach large groups, but also niche audiences. Maybe small groups who have very narrow interests who are not being well served. And there are people, there are probably, if you think about your own life, you probably have some interests that are not broadly popular. Maybe it's a television show. Maybe it's some author, or maybe it's some sport. Like maybe fantasy football. You're into fantasy football, but not everyone's into fantasy football. So you're able to reach those people who are interested in that. Or maybe you're interested in an old television show. I know there's a specific group who are very into the original Lost in Space television series from the 1960s, or other people who are interested in history. I know actually there's one person who's branded themselves very well. She's called the History Girl. And she's only interested in the history of New Jersey, but there are other people who are interested in New Jersey history, and they follow her, and that creates a whole group. And actually, I met this I can't remember her real name is. She calls herself the History Girl. I was at a history event, and there she showed up. And so you can create these communities that start online, and it can connect people who. And I'll give you an example. This is not so much a commercial example, but I'm not sure how many of you might be familiar with the Flat Earth Society. There's actually a group of people who believe the Earth is flat. Now, this, started a long time ago. Actually, it died out, and it was a belief that certain people held, but eventually the evidence, ended up. So there are very few people who believe the Earth was flat. But when the internet started, and social media started, those diverse people who were probably thousands of miles away from each other, all around the globe, irony intended, were able to connect. And they actually revived the dead Flat Earth Society. Well, the Flat Earth Society, which had died, and they brought it back to life. Now, that's not so much a commercial opportunity, but it does show you how you can bring communities together that are very small, that would otherwise not be able to connect and survive. This is in some ways a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing, but we have to take the good, the bad with the good. It increased accessibility. Anyone who has internet access can set up a social media account. And that means you can do it, but even your competitors can do it, and your detractors can do it. And if you look at social media accounts for certain politicians, and then there are detractor accounts, people who hate that particular politician. That happens all the time. Reduce time to delivery. You can set up a social media account very quickly. Actually, probably within 10 minutes, and start pounding out messages. Of course, it takes a little longer to get a following, but you can put it out there. And also provides a lot of opportunity for audience feedback. People will respond to you immediately. And interestingly, the more controversial you are, the more feedback you will get. Now, it may not be positive, but you'll get noticed, and that's kind of important. And you can also, and a kind of an extension of social media is blogging, and where people will, you can set up a website very quickly now too. Websites like Blogspot and WordPress. I'm a WordPress user. You can set up a website very quickly. You don't have to know HTML code. You can actually do it for free. Although if you want a nice URL, you have to license that. Usually, actually, very inexpensive. I think like it's $18 or something like that. And then with your Twitter account or your Facebook account, you can push people to your blog. Now that blog could be about your product or your service or about something else. So we are probably the most powerful generation in terms of communication. Of course, that means we should also be more responsible, but as we know, some people aren't. And the audiences are self-selecting. I mean, if you are promoting a certain product or service or certain idea or an event or whatever, people who are interested in that will select it and they will follow. And so it's a very good way to pull people together who have common interests. So, all right. That about covers it for direct marketing and social media. A lot of this is, you may have noticed, I'm not sticking to the textbook as tightly as I have in earlier lectures. I'm going a little bit more in depth. So certainly read the textbook, you'll get some other information, but understand that I'm not trying to just regurgitate the textbook chapters. All right, so there will, however, be a simulation, which will be closer to the textbook. And so I wish you luck. If you have any questions about anything, please do not hesitate to email me, and I will get back to you. And if you would like a Zoom conference, that is fine too. All right. Take care.